Hi, everybody, and welcome to my channel this time around for part two of the live show for the Fairyland series. I know we're going to give a little bit of time for people to jump in here, but also if you're watching this back, I don't want to bore you with us kind of sitting around and waiting. So, welcome. And let's start with letting Cara introduce herself and tell you a little bit about where you can find her.
Sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Cara. My channel is Wild Book Garden. I'm primarily active on YouTube, although I'm kind of on Instagram now because Twitter is
Ooh,
imploding.
yes.
Um, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen with that? I read pretty much everything. Obviously, a lot of middle grade, and the importance of adults reading books intended for younger readers is something I'm really passionate about, which is why I'm so excited about this project. I read a lot of fantasy and historical fiction, nonfiction, contemporary, sprinkle in some romance and other things. So read very widely, and I'm excited to finally be reading this series. Like I've owned it for an embarrassingly long time.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about this project and kind of what
Yeah.
inspired? Because you reached out to me like, hey, I want to read these books. Will you read them with me? So, tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about what you were thinking when you kind of thought about this project, but also going into these books.
Sounds good. So this is obviously like a series read along by itself for the Fairyland series, but it's also kind of the kickoff to a larger project and focus that I'm doing, which is loosely called the Not a Genre Book Club. And it's a pretty simple focus. Basically, we're going to be reading and discussing middle grade and young adult books with the same level of detail and respect that adult titles get. And I know that there definitely are people who already do that. I'm not saying no one does that, but I do think it's less common. Um, and like as we're seeing with the Fairyland books, I think this is one of the reasons I wanted to start with this series, because I felt like it'd be a great example of how like thematically rich middle grade and young adult books can be. And yeah, and I called it not a genre because that's honestly one of the, I think, biggest misconceptions about middle grade and young adult is people treat it like a genre, so that if you read a couple books that are middle grade or young adult and you don't like them, you're like, oh, it's not for me. And there's actually a huge variety there. Ignore the fact that Goodreads lumps them all together. But yeah.
Yeah. And so, like I said, she reached out to me, and this is obviously one of my, not obviously, I guess if you know
Pretty
me,
obviously. Yeah.
it's like hanging out over here on my shelves. But this is one of my favorite series of all times. So I was super excited to have an excuse to reread it. I I now at this point and like rereading them every year. Uh, Jocelyn is in the comments saying she needs to reread it, which is really funny to me because her and I reread this 2020, like pandemic. We were like rereading and sharing thoughts. So it hasn't been that long since you reread it. And I feel like that is always the case for me. I am always like in some status of like rereading the series, but part of why I really love it goes back to what you've just been saying about how thematically rich it is. So I'm super excited to talk through this. And even if you haven't read the book or haven't read it recently, I think that this will just be like you can definitely follow along with the conversation. We'll be talking about the book, but I think we'll also be talking just about like coming of age stories and themes and books and stuff. So hopefully you guys can enjoy us gushing about this book. I mean, I will be gushing. I guess the place we're gonna start is Cara. How did you like this book? Did you enjoy it?
Excellent. Excellent segue. Yeah, I loved this one. I think I'm at like 4.5 stars right now. Like I loved it even more than the first book. Because
Okay.
I mentioned for the first book, one of the only things that didn't consistently work for me is, even though I love Catherine M. Valente's writing, it felt a little bit cluttered to me in some places. Like it felt like she could have picked one really amazing image for the paragraph, and instead there were like three or something.
Mhm.
But here it felt perfectly balanced to me. I loved the writing. I think I liked the story of this one more as well. Like that kind of fairyland, fairy revels thing is something I'm very into. I know we're going to get into all of the shadow stuff. I thought that was fascinating. And it reminded me just a tiny bit of I think Wintersmith is the name of it. It's a Terry Pratchett book, one of the only ones I've read that I loved. So that also was great. Um, yeah, like this one just really, I think it was even better than the first book. So I'm having a great time.
Good.
I would die for Aubergine the Night Dodo. So love her out of all proportion to the amount of time she's on page. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
That's
loved
good
it.
to hear. This would have been awkward if you were like, actually, I hated it.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm out. Sorry.
um, I reread my review before this for the book, and I always like keep my original review and kind of add on as I'm rereading or whatnot. So it was interesting to see my original review because I felt that this one was like a little bit slower than the first one. It had a little bit more of like an ambling sort of pace, where I felt that the first book was a little more go go go. And I also was like a little, I think my first read, you see the big difference between my first read and my reread. I was a little disappointed because I was like going into this wanting to like revisit the cast of characters that I fell in love with.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we don't get them in the like they're kind of there, their shadows are there, but we don't actually get like A through L and
Yeah.
Saturday. And so I don't know, that was a me thing. It was like my expectations versus what I got. But then on the second read, I was like, never mind. I love this cast of characters like plenty. And that kind of makes up for it. So in the grand scheme of the entire series, not the first one is still my favorite. But I am also like just a sucker for first books in a series. And obviously, like the
Mhm.
first one I read, what introduced me to the whole thing. But the second one is like a very, very close second. Like it's like right there in terms of my favorite of the series. So I'm very glad that you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Uh, s- People agreeing. I didn't think that the second book could match up to how much I love the book one, but I'm so glad I was wrong. Yes, I we're going to talk about thematic stuff because I think that's a good way to sort of go into the conversation. But I will say the one thing that I just absolutely loved going into this book was that the line of continuity, because I you have that one moment in book one where she sacrifices her shadow, and we just keep moving on through the adventure. And there's some like nods to it, like she gets back home, and the like one of the last things that we read in book one is like, and she has no shadow, right? And so like that's
Mhm.
the only sort of mark of her coming home from this adventure. So for this to be like that actually has consequences. Like you can't just sacrifice your shadow and like and then
Yeah.
forget about it. Like and for her, like first thing to like really be feeling when she gets to Fairyland is like, oh, I made a mess that I need to
Yeah.
clean. So maybe I should go do like that. I was immediately like, I'm home. I'm back in this world. I love this so much, and I love this continuity.
Yeah. I loved that as well. I really like that this book is in a lot of ways about consequences.
Yes.
Like not just about the shadow, but yeah, like September, like you can't just overthrow a dictator and everything just kind of works itself out, you know? As nice as that would be. Um, yeah, I really liked that. I like that Catherine and Valente has clearly like thought through like I mean, even like the ration cards, you know, and that parallel between what
Yes.
September is living through, which
Yes.
is the Second World War, and then in Fairyland, which is also kind of a world war, like just little things like that. Even like details that you think are just like, oh, this is like fun and quirky. It's like, no, it means something, which I love.
Yes.
And it's interesting to me that you mentioned that it was maybe slower than book one because I actually feel like the plot felt more cohesive to me. Even though
Okay.
like the first book definitely has like the quest structure, this one to me felt more, I guess, focused. And
Mm,
maybe that was also because I'm more inclined to enjoy this kind of quest or something because like you know the fairyland, the specific kinds of like fairy and fairyland things in this book are things that I really enjoy, but this one actually felt like it moved quicker to me. I was very engaged like the whole time, and that might also have been because I loved the writing even more. So there's a multitude of reasons it could be,
yeah.
but
It definitely is more focused, at least in the sense of, like I said, she gets there and it immediately is like, I made a mess. Like, I need to fix it. And it's very much like, I need to find Halloween, like I and her steps are kind of laid out. Whereas in the first book, she first of all, it takes a long time to even get to Fairyland. Like it takes a while while we're in this period of transition of her like moving through the machine that will actually get her to Fairyland. And then she's just kind of questing around. She's like, I'm gonna act like I'm on an adventure and see what happens. And it starts to like take shape from there. Whereas from here, she very clearly, from like as soon as she finds out what's going on, she has a mission. So it definitely is a lot more focused. And I'm super, super curious. I'm jumping way ahead, but I'm curious how you will find book three because I honestly have reread book three like 5 times. I still don't know what that one is about. So
I can't wait. Only
all right.
vibes.
Yeah, like the most only vibe one. I could not give you a plot synopsis of that one.
Excited.
Awesome. All right, so this we're gonna go into themes for this one. Um, I think like all of I was thinking about like the different ways that this is like so I don't know theme heavy, but also like how much it has to say. And there are things that obviously have like real world like hit me in the feels of like experiences that I have, and there were things that were just I don't know that just hit me anyways for in story reasons that weren't things that I'm like wow I have experienced that too, but they were so like I don't know embedded in September's experience and her own journey that they like really really hit my heart as well. So I guess as we're talking through themes we can talk a little bit about like the parts that are like this is like a life lesson versus
Yeah.
like this is a quirky in story thing that still gave me like big feelings. But the biggest I think theme here is definitely one about like light and darkness and like shadows and gray areas and whatnot. So how did you find or do you agree with that kind of assessment and how did you find that kind of theme?
Yes. That was like the first theme I wrote down. I definitely think that is like one of the primary things this book is about, and I loved it. um, I'm not surprised because this seems to be something Catherine and Valente really likes to write about. Is like dark does not mean bad,
Yes.
um, and I just really loved it. I love the idea of shadows being like secret parts of yourself. So it's not like September just has an evil twin.
Yes.
Like Halloween definitely does some very bad things, but it's like we see this like it's like a reflection of all of the characters whose shadows we see. It's like they are them, but they're also not.
Mhm.
And we care about them because of the characters they come from, but we also grow to care about them in their own right, which I think is really impressive. Um yeah, and just like there's some beautiful lines about like darkness is also where the stars are, and um I really enjoyed it. I don't have very coherent things to say. I was like, yes, A plus, love this.
I also
Um,
loved it too. Yeah, so you know, I loved everything that it had to say about that, but also like this kind of also ties into like the big thing that this is doing about like coming of age, and you know, like I don't know, growing up and in growing up, sort of not only like growing a heart or whatever is like kind of the thing that the way that she describes it, but like discovering people and like learning how she's like learning how to love and have friendships and like the complexities of people. And so like the light and shadow kind of play of it really like helps cement that. And even from the beginning, like again, this is one of those things where I'm like I obviously have never been whisked away to like a fairy tale like place and then had to come back and held that secret, right? But there was something just so I don't know, like so relatable about the way that Valenti talks about like September feeling set apart from like the other people around
yes.
her and like how she felt like an outsider and how she had this portion of herself that she had to keep really close and that she couldn't tell anyone about and how that marked her. And just that like sort of description of like being the loner kid or the outsider, I was like, oh my heart, like
Yeah.
that. And so like that play also of like secrecy and like this hidden parts of you and like light and darkness, I thought were really, really well done and well explored throughout the story.
Yeah, and I also really like how she took that secrecy and then she flipped it when she, like, comes back to Fairyland, and she's like, "I've already been on an adventure, I know how these things work," and then she's like, "Oh, no, I don't." Like, it makes me think of, like, when you're, like, a senior in high school and you're like, "I'm the big kid," and then you're a freshman in college and you're like, "I'm a baby again, no." I
Yes.
just thought that was so funny, and, like, yeah, it was that combination of, like, very relatable but also like never had this experience in my life. But
Yes, yes.
yeah,
And the way she's like, she gets to Fairyland and she's immediately like, she can't stop talking. Like she's
yeah,
like, "Hello, everybody! Like, let me tell you all about," and like it just like comes bubbling out of her. It was so adorable. I was like, I get it. You know, she'd been
yeah.
holding that in for so long that the moment she steps in, she's like literally shouting in a forest, like, "Hello!
Let's go on my adventure now. Like,
I'm here."
yeah. And then her realizing that like even though this was a huge life-changing thing for her, it was like, oh yeah, that one day in like autumn where all those things happened. And she's like, oh, this was not as big a deal for you guys as it was for me.
Yes. I think that that is like you mentioned like the way that this talks about also like consequences and like you know you can't just overthrow like a dictator, a regime, and like
Yeah.
everything will be okay. And it's really funny because she comes back and she's like, okay, everything must be great in Fairyland, like let's go on an adventure. And like to see that it actually just like reverted back to like more government, like no, there's a new king, there's a new queen underground, like there's these ration books, like rules are still in place, like, and so I thought that that was really funny.
Yeah.
Because you know
Yeah.
in her child mind she's like, I did it, like the Marquez is gone, like let's party, let's adventure, and it's like, no, no, government will government. Like
Yeah. And even like Halloween even tries she like paves over all of the rules, like thinking like no more rules. And it's like that's not actually how it works. Like not being able to read them doesn't mean you don't have to obey them.
yes.
Um yeah, and I like to when as soon as September realizes like, oh no, I have to do another quest, like things are not okay yet. She's like, okay, we're gonna do this. I'm gonna beat everybody again, and then I'm gonna have my adventure on a little flying horse or whatever it was. Like she's like, I'm gonna have a nice, happy, fluffy adventure, but first I've gotta fix everything.
Yes. The repeated like heartbreak, part of the repeated heartbreak of like September in Fairyland is that um like she like keeps running out of time, right? She never gets to have like the pure adventure. I know we're
Yeah.
only 2 books in, but this is like the thing that she repeatedly like gets torn out of Fairyland. And then when she gets dropped in, it's like fix something. And so
Yeah.
like repeated like her keep like her continuing to come back and be like, I'm ready for my adventure.
She's like, "Can I have a fun one this time?" Like, that'd be great. Yeah, it's very Narnia in the sense, like, I remember there was that part where the Pevensies one of them even says they're like, "Is Narnia always at war?" And they're like, "Oh, no, you only get brought here when, like, everything is going wrong. Like, most of the time, things are great." And they're like, "Oh, okay." It's like, that's kind
Cool,
of
cool, cool, cool. Yeah.
yeah, like September. It's like, you're only here when everything is falling apart. Like, have fun.
The best part about like Halloween, like paving over the rules and being like rules don't exist anymore, is that like obviously that is a Halloween thing. Like she did it attributed to her, but when we're talking about like the shadows being kind of part of like the other ones as well, it's still like a very September mentality, and you see that when she because she arrives and she's like, I'm here for my adventure, like
Yeah.
like you know it is, I feel like that is the same thought in both of
Mhm.
them that made them go like, all right, like things are simple, like let's just deal with it this way. And you see that kind of you know in both girls
Yeah.
in different kind of ways.
Yes.
All right. I think also I was just thinking about this, like the two sides of oh, so we also in like seeing the sort of like darker sides or like the secret sides of like these people. I thought that this did I don't know that I had ever seen a story or a middle grade kind of tackle consent in the way that this
Yes.
did. And I don't know that I had ever really thought about it. Obviously, it's like a pretty like overt thing. It's not like or whatnot. But when I read it this time, I was like, oh my gosh, like the way that this like really goes in on talking about, both Saturday stealing the first kiss, the shadow stealing the first kiss from September, but also A through L, like turning her into a wyvern against her
Yeah.
will and just like kind of throwing her into the sky or whatnot, like both of those instances, and that being the thing that she keeps like she kind of goes with it in the moment, but then she like keeps thinking back to like my boys would not do this.
Yes. Boys would never. Um, yeah, that was something I noticed and I really liked as well. And I especially like that we see, even though that September, it's not that she doesn't enjoy being a wyvern or a fairy or even necessarily getting kissed by September, but she didn't get to choose it. And I really like that we have that idea of like, just because she enjoyed herself doesn't mean that you get to, decide when it happens.
Yes.
And of course there's that like beautiful full circle moment where like the real Saturday at the end is like, well, your first kiss doesn't matter, but if you sometimes want to kiss me, that would be nice. Like, it's just so sweet. Like,
Loved it so much. He's like, why would I care about your first kiss or who
I
you kiss?
know.
You can sometimes kiss me. Precious baby. And then in that moment, like she kisses him like she always wanted to,
Yeah.
basically. Like, and that does really bring it full circle into that place of like talking about consent and like
Yeah.
it being like an intentional thing of like, again, whether or not she enjoyed it at the moment or was like confused by it, but it wasn't what she wanted when she wanted and how she thought she wanted it. So coming to the end of her like kind of owning that moment, that was really, really nice. And I love, I don't know why that sticks out so much to me as like the thing that she's experiencing with like Shadow A through L and Shadow Saturday is like these moments where like they keep taking things from her in a way that she's like, this is not who I know and love kind of thing.
Yeah. No, it stood out to me as well. And that was kind of one of the major things that had me like, okay, wait, are these gonna be bad guys? Because like, again, like September's boys would never. Like, and I think Catherine and Valenti did a really good job of like not making them like overtly like frightening, but still having those moments of like, oh, this is uncomfortable though, because she didn't want this to happen, and it doesn't matter how well you know her or how much fun she's having now. It's like that doesn't change the fact that she didn't have any choice in this. And
Yes.
I feel like even though it's a very small part of the book, the fact that it comes up multiple times, because like Saturday does this again, and then he turns her into a fairy later, and then there's the fact that he like was gonna just erase her memories, um,
Yes.
without her knowledge or consent at all. Um, like those things are important story moments, but they also kind of tie back to like these. They are part of her friends, but they are not. They're like her friends without as much of a filter, I guess.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, we see that also in like Halloween and her behavior as well, especially when we figure out that the alley man is her
Yeah.
father. And like that whole thing of like her, the whole thing is that she's like, I'm going to, I want everything. I want my family. I want my friends. I want my freedom. And so she's like acting in like not necessarily good ways to like secure what she wants. And so like we see that in all of the shadows, right? Is that they're acting to obtain what they want, but without this sort of filter. And so, like, that cross between exploring that and then, like, the consent and everything, and how that makes them different from her actual friends who have like the care and the empathy and the filter, I thought was really neat. And the best part is that even up until the end, when we as a reader start to have feelings for these characters anyway, and even September is like, this is not like, we end up in a gray area where like it's not very clearly black and white. And still, like, one of the last things that either Saturday or A through L says is like, well, if you had just like forgotten like you were supposed to, this never would have happened. Like, no remorse. Like,
Yeah.
just very like, that was the plan and you didn't go along with it. And I was just like, Oh, brother.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, "We could have been happy together if you just, like, erased half of your brain, like, what's
Yeah.
wrong?" Like,
Like,
yeah,
it's not our fault. You just didn't get amnesia like you were supposed to.
yeah. When she got the clutch, I love those, like, Jarl hops, they're so much fun, and
Yeah.
when September is like, "I think I'd like a clutch," and I kind of had this moment of, like, I mean, why? Like, you've got like, you're not forgetting anything, so, like, what's the big deal? And then later, I'm like, "I am very glad that you have this." September
Yes,
knew. She's an experienced quester now. She knows that
she
you
is.
always pick up a magical item if you can.
She gets so many magical items in this one.
Yeah.
She gets, like, the jacket and the dress, and then the clutch, and then she also picks up like additional like friends. We already said aubergine, obviously. We do get a little visit from Gleam that honestly why it was just to make us sad.
It was
uh
so sad. Like,
but yes, my point here was that she does get a lot of magical items, and I love that. I love that
yeah,
as part of a quest fantasy is that like you pick up not only like found family but like items as you go along.
yeah, that like help you in a later like section of the adventure. I love that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, speaking of that part with Gleam and
Uh-huh.
like themes related to growing up, it's like,
Mhm.
excuse me, I did not expect a I don't know, an allegory for like friendships drifting apart or whatever. Like it just because like September, she's only 13 and
Yeah.
she's like having to learn that like, oh, sometimes you care about people and then you're separated and then you find each other again, but it's not the same and you have to go your separate ways. And I'm like, Catherine, like she's a baby. But
A lot of the like quotes that I have highlighted here are the ones about how like people drift apart and like stories tendril us like separate, like further from each other and whatnot. And it just it doesn't stop hitting no matter what age or what year like I read it in. It especially hit like post COVID because
mhm.
I don't know if this happened to you, but like, there were friendships that I had that were like, we would catch up with each other, like going out, like a dinner a couple times a year or once a month or whatnot, but we weren't doing that anymore. And so those friendships, like, we really drifted apart. So reading those quotes again, I was like, oh, okay, this is going to hit me in the freaking feels every single time that I read it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, or even like the post-COVID friendship thing of like, "Oh, I did not realize how little you care about other people." Like for the most part, the people that I know best, like that hadn't been a thing, but it's like sometimes there's people that I
Yes.
know through like other parts of my life, and I'm like, I cannot unlearn the things that I now know about you.
You as a human.
Yeah. Yep. I have
Yeah.
some notes. Like,
And now I have some quotes to describe my feelings from this book because, yes, that theme of like drifting apart was pretty heavy. And I don't think, if I'm remembering correctly, it's not the last time we will see it. Like it continues to be a thing. So, okay, one of the things that I love about the story is that it definitely is like a quest fantasy and it definitely has a super strong, uh, found family, but consistently the second book that we find September having to go part of her journey alone, where she like all she wants is like an adventure with her friends, and the story keeps putting her in the situations where it's like, no, it's you have to go on, like you by yourself sort of thing. We saw her like circumnavigating Fairyland in the first book and like building the ship and having to go that alone, and we see her kind of going deeper into Fairyland below. And this one, I mean, she's without her real friends basically throughout the whole thing. But
yeah.
on top of that, she also has to keep like questing alone. And I just those parts of it, I love, but it also always breaks my heart when she's in a part of her story where she's like, "Just me again," and I'm like, "Oh no."
Yeah.
Any other themes or things that stood out to you?
Um, this might be something you want to talk about in characters, so if that's true, then we can wait. But something that I also thought about a lot with like the darkness and shadow and how that doesn't always mean like evil, um,
Mhm.
are like the antagonists of this book. like we have Halloween as our main
Mhm.
one, but we also see the Marquess again.
Mhm.
And I just find it like it was so interesting because for most of the book, I thought that Halloween was going to be one of those characters where, like, okay, no, we do actually have to fix this. September's going to need to get her shadow back. You know, that's how the book is going to need to end. Like that's the only way they could fix Fairyland. Um, but by the end, like they're having that last kind of confrontation, and I'm like, Halloween has a point though. It's like I can so understand why all of the shadows would want to actually be alive. Like how could you ask somebody to give up basically existing, you know,
Mhm.
for something that they never get to experience. And even though the things they were doing as a result of that were not okay, um it still was like that moment of like, okay, but I don't think I hate them anymore. Like what are what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And so that to me felt very similarly to the idea of shadows. So like Halloween as the shadow September, there are still parts of her that we love and that we care
Mhm.
about. um and even and like the Marquess, it's kind of funny because she's like the Marquess is sort of the evil twin already, so the shadow Marquess is like the nice twin.
Yes.
But I loved seeing her again. That was super interesting. So yeah, I feel like the antagonists of this book worked really well with like the themes of dark and light, and how like the secret parts of you are not always bad. They're just the parts that you don't pay as much attention to. So I really
Yeah.
liked that.
Yes, the villains now 2 for 2 in terms of, like, having a point. Like, maybe
Yeah.
you're going about it, like, the wrong way, but you have a point. And 2 for 2 in terms of, like, they have found themselves in a situation that they didn't ask for, right? The Marquess is ravished. Halloween was, like, split from her human, in term like, she didn't ask for that, right? And so, uh that goes back into what you were saying in terms of like, she didn't ask for it, but now she's alive. How could you ask her to go back to not being alive? Like that is,
Exactly.
she has a point. That is,
Yeah.
yeah. Amy is saying that it's the version of the Marquess who she's afraid others will take advantage of. So the things like in this case for her, for that character, what she's squirreling away is what she doesn't want other people to see.
Mhm.
The vulnerability, really. So
Yeah.
yes, Valenti really mixes lighthearted with like hard hitting lines. Absolutely, yes, it will be. Like, we'll be in the middle of the quirkiest, like weirdest scene with characters, and my highlights of like quotes are really weird sometimes because it will just be like all of this like not fluff, but it will be like these things that taken out of context nobody would understand, like unless you're sitting there hearing about like the coffee and the tea family or whatever, like a bunch of this is not going to make sense, but then it will just be like one line that I want like tattooed on my body. uh so it's like the mix of like my quotes and highlights is very weird.
Yeah. Well, and I remember for the discussion of the first book, you were talking about um the way the writing, sorry, I like lost my train of thought of how to describe this. Keep going. We'll come back to this. Sorry.
No, it's
I was
good.
like in the middle of saying it and I'm like, where are the words?
They went away. I think that was all I had for themes. I had light, dark, and gray, the good and bad things in people, hope and memories, and oh, also like what makes a person felt like it was like
I that
yeah.
that theme gets me every single time. Like it almost doesn't matter if the other parts of the story aren't working for me. Usually that will be the part where I'm like, okay, you did one thing really well because I I live for that.
And I mean, this is such a, we've been talking about it kind of nonstop. As we're cycling through, we're like coming back to this idea of these characters as their shadow selves, right? And we see this when A through L like first see September, and he's like, I was there though. Like I was there when you built that whole relationship with A through L. And like he has essentially the same memories. He lived the same life. So like that exploration of like, does that make him A through L? like what makes a person in terms of like your lived experiences, your memories or whatnot. I do like eat it up. I'm like,
Yeah, give it to me every single time, and
yes.
especially in fantasy, because I feel like that theme is something that is more often associated with sci-fi, with,
Mm,
like, androids and aliens, and
mm,
I like it there too, but there is something specifically about the way that fantasy books can do that with these, like, non-human characters, but they feel so human.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I love that. I also remembered the thing I was gonna say.
Okay.
So about, like, the writing and, like, you were talking about these, like, really fun and fluffy parts, and then she'll just, like, punch you, like, right in your emotions. I
Mhm,
remember for the first discussion, you were talking about how, like, one of the things that really elevates the book is how, like, genuine it is. Like, it's
mhm,
not a parody. It's not silly, even though there are parts of it that feel like they could be silly. Like, one of the things that happened in this book, that made me think of this is, like, when we're finding all about, like, Aubergine and, like, the night dodos and her family and, like, the whole sequence of events, like, the story that she's telling, it's something that could sound a little bit silly. It's like, and then the dodos all ran into, like, this little, like, crack in the mountain, and just, like, the idea of a night dodo is,
mhm.
like, so silly sounding, but it's not silly because you love Aubergine, and she is, like, such a genuine, like, because she is upset telling the story and September's upset hearing it, it doesn't feel silly or, like, over the top. Like, it just feels, like, very earnest. I love
Yes.
that.
Yeah, I do too. I feel like the earnestness of these is like a make it or break it element for people. Like I totally get
Yeah.
why people might feel like this is like too, I don't know, something about it is too like earnest or like, and I wouldn't even say like sickly sweet because I don't think that they are that because they've got so many thematic things that are about like darkness and that do explore like heavier themes, but I feel like there could be readers who read the earnestness for something a little cloying, and
Mhm.
I totally get it. But again, I just eat it up because it is like I love it. It just shows its entire heart, sort of in every way that it moves through the story. Like I feel like I know exactly what like Valenti is trying to communicate to us at all times because it's just like right there on the paper, like her heart on her sleeve sort of thing in terms of like capturing it in the story. And that's like why I love it. But also when people are like, nah, I'm like, I get it, but
Yeah. Yeah. This is definitely not a series for people who don't like really heavy thematic elements.
no.
Um, but I think, like, there's a difference for me between, like, heavy themes and, like, heavy-handed themes because,
Mm,
like, I think because even though it is very clearly laid out, like, in the story, like, the quotes that we are gonna share, I'm sure are going to be a lot about that. So it's like you said, it like her heart is on her sleeve. She's not hiding any of it, but that is also backed up by the story and the characters. Because I think
yeah.
that's when, to me, themes feel heavy-handed is when it either doesn't match up with what the story is doing, or it's like only words. Like you're just like explaining it to me rather than having it like come through very naturally in the story and the characters as well. And like all of the themes, even though they are like very obvious and in your face, they are also very subtle in the way that they really, I think, permeate every aspect of the book, and
Yes, yes, that is true.
I love
There
it.
are ways they are explored where we can obviously see like shadows of the people, like or whatnot. But the way that she mirrors those themes in like smaller moments and like more nuanced things, like secrets and secrecy and things like that, I think that that's what makes it like really masterful as well. And you're right about it, like being really rooted in a voice. It isn't just like fluff for the sake of fluff or like quotable quotes, but not only do we have a great sense of the main character in September, but also of the narrator, who is like her own
Mhm.
character, and the narrator's voice like becomes like it is very like the way that she presents it is very like she's sharing this with us. It's almost taking moments to teach like September and guide us through the story. So framing it that way, I think, is also really smart in terms of like giving us like a additional vehicle to sort of process and digest all of
Yeah.
this like content and all of the teachable moments and all of the quotable quotes and
Yeah.
all right, let us, unless there's anything theme wise, I'm gonna like take us back. We've been talking about her a fair bit, but I just want to make sure we dedicate some time in checking in with our girl, my best girl, September, and her little arc and her journey. So any thoughts about her character growth, or how she shows up in the second book?
I love this girl. um, I love her stubborn goodness.
Yes.
And how like she just keeps getting more that way. um, I love that I love that like even though she gets angry and aggressive, it's always about things that are understandable or that are really important and that matter. Like her anger is almost always on behalf of other people,
Yeah.
which I find very endearing.
Yes.
Um, I love that we got kind of another step in her journey of like growing a heart and how painful that is, but how like beautiful it is too. Like, and I feel like that's one of those things that it has like functions in this story and for September specifically, but I feel like you can also read so much into that about how like and the book even talks about this as well, like caring about people opens you up to being hurt in such very specific ways, but it's
Mhm.
also like really the only thing that makes anything worth it.
Mhm.
And seeing September like kind of realize that, it's just like, yeah, I love this girl.
I do too.
I again, it's like I am less coherent the more I care about things in this book.
Yes, I love her so much for all of the reasons that you listed, and I love the way that she's crafted in her story, and like as almost like a self-aware heroine and adventure. I love that because it
Mhm.
gives us such insight into her thought process and the way she kind of boldly moves through her story. Again, like from arriving into it and be like, I'm here for my adventure, to realizing like I made a mess and I need to fix it, and then like everything on from there, especially like a very motivated by, I need to make things right for people. Like it just endears you to this character so much, and how capable she is. Like even when she doesn't know what she's doing, she's like, I'm gonna figure it out. And I just
Yeah.
love that scrappiness. I love her so much. And I loved seeing her, like how we've seen her mature through this, and not only because of her experiences in Fairyland, but we get a little taste of seeing like what her real life has like has how it has forced her to grow, not only with the passage of time, but she and her mother are still alone. Her mother works like 6 days a week. She talks about, like, she's talking about ration cards in a way that is like, we've got to be responsible. We got to ration. Like, this is the way, in a way that I'm just like, this girl has like matured so much because of life, because of living through her father being, fighting a war. The way she talks about the radio and like listening in on
Mhm.
the radio and like the fear that that causes, like you really get the sense that this is a girl that has grown up so much just since the last time we saw her, and then she's put into another adventure that causes her to grow even more, and I'm just like, my baby, oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah, and like that she takes responsibility constantly for,
Yes.
yeah, like we were saying about this book dealing so much with consequences. It's like she never even hesitates about
Mhm.
the fact that like she's gonna have to set things right.
Yes.
Um, and there's that great part where she's talking about like the difference between like a quest and I don't remember what the other one is. And she's like, well, a quest you're usually cleaning up somebody else's mess, but this is my mess.
Yes. Well,
And I
she's like
love
a
that.
knight. Well, she's talking about being a knight. She's like, a knight is
Okay.
usually like questing for others. So maybe I can
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
bishop.
And I love like that's another thing that is like a fun little like quirky thing where it's like, oh, we're gonna, use a different chess piece and that's a surprise. Um, but that comes back in to be so important because at the end where she is figuring out with Halloween what they can do to basically have everyone win, she's like, well, I'm gonna go at this slant ways because I'm a bishop, I'm not a knight.
Yeah.
So it's I love that even those little one-off things are not one-offs, like they matter.
Yes. This is again like a repeated sort of thing, and we see this, like we will see this again, but we've already seen it in terms of like her continuing to try on like roles and titles and whatnot, and like it kind of goes back also to like items or whatever. So she was like the irascible child. She was like, you know, born on a Tuesday or Friday or whatever it was that made her like specifically suited to do certain things in the first book. You know, here she's like they're trying to figure out what her title is. Is she a bishop? Is she this? Is
Yeah.
she? And this continues to happen to her throughout, where people are like, okay, we need to like slot you into a place, basically. And she's like, you know, keeps going through these cycles of like, okay, I guess if I have to like wear a title, how about this one, sort of thing. And I just love that for her because she continues to just like try and figure out how she who she is and how she fits into sort of
Yeah.
like an adventurous story.
Yeah, like another one of those, like, this is weirdly relatable for a book that has nothing to do with my real life, is like she's going around and talking to everyone and everybody knows what they're doing with their life, you know, what their calling is. And September's like, I don't actually know. And I'm like, me too, September. Like,
But you're 14 and I'm 36. So
yeah, it's like,
I remember like having this feel and like this not as young as September. I'm sure I did have that feeling, but anytime I watch like documentaries or read memoirs of people who are like really incredibly talented and knew from like a young age what they wanted to do, that is absolutely the feeling of like how. Like I don't understand that at all. Like I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I'm with you, September.
right?
Like
Yeah,
yes, I
it's
love
like they've published their third novel and they're going to their final exams tomorrow. And I'm like, okay.
it. Cool. I guess I'll do this live show about my favorite silly little book.
My silly little feelings on my silly little books.
Yes, exactly. We've already talked about our love for the Night Dodo, but any other characters you want to check in with, or anything that stood out to you from the character perspective?
Yeah. Yeah, I love Aubergine so much. Like she was barely in it and I'm like, you are my favorite.
Yes.
But I also really liked that we got to see the Marquess again. I didn't
Mhm.
expect that. Like we talked already about what an interesting foil she is for herself, but also for September, and how September is still kind of dealing with the knowledge that she's not completely different from her. Um, yeah, I loved this cast of characters in general. I also had a moment at the beginning where I'm like, okay, wait, so we're not gonna actually get Saturday and A through L. But once I kind of accepted that, I ended up really liking everybody kind of on their own terms. I liked the people she met on her wacky little quests, like left the Minotaur. um, the
Yes,
Jarl hops were super fun.
yes,
I liked Wit and Study, these two random crows who have like one job in the story and they're just like hanging out until they do it. Like
yes.
it's this is just a really good, I think, ensemble cast kind of series. Um yeah, like I had feelings about everybody, honestly, which is always nice because I feel like sometimes I read books and like I don't like all the people you're supposed to.
Mhm.
But here I definitely did. Um yeah, just really enjoyed the whole kind of like the rotating cast of characters, but also like the main ones that we got. Like, even though I didn't love Shadow Saturday and Shadow A through L as much as the ones we already knew, they were so interesting, and I really
Mhm.
like that. I like that they were part of the story. So
Yeah. All right. We're like winding down here. And I'm like dying to know your like standout scenes, your standout quotes, unless and before we get there, if there's anything else that we haven't mentioned that you wanted to pull from your notes.
I think those were. I think you hit all of the ones that I had noted down. So
Perfect.
excellent job.
Yeah. Why
Um,
thank you.
Yeah. I like oh, okay. I just saw a chapter header and I'm like, that onion man, that was that was a time. Um Reminded me of Over the Garden Wall, where it's like, this is really disturbing, and then you like meet them and you're like, oh, you're just a person. I'm
Yeah.
still a little weirded out, but you're just a person. Um Also the moment at the end, like she's gonna get me with every book ending, I think, because
Yes.
like when she comes back and her dad's there, and, like, cause I was so scared when her mom comes out crying, I'm like, "Oh my god,
Yes,
her dad just died! Her
yes,
dad just died in the war," and it's like yeah, it was
yeah.
beautiful.
I agree, and even before we know the dad is there, when she's, like, holding on to his shadow to return him home, there was something about that also that, like, from that moment, I'm just already, like, deep in my feels, so as you get to the final scene, I was just like, "Ugh, oh, yeah, they did,
I loved that. Oh my god. That was, like, half a sentence, and it gave me so many feelings,
Yes.
like
Uh,
again, like, very Peter Pan and Wendy in a way because that's also a thing that happens near the very end of that book, and it, like, breaks my heart in this very specific way about, like, growing up and all of that, so, yeah, I loved that.
I also, because this book starts with September being like, like nobody knows about my adventures or whatnot. Like nobody, she has that experience so close to her chest and to herself. Not that she can talk to her father's shadow about it, but I love ending the book like her father in some version having been to Fairyland, a nod that
Mhm.
her mother maybe knows something or has been there or whatnot. And so it really brought it full circle of like, okay, and it also, I love one of my like least favorite things to see in media, even though it's like understandable or whatnot, is when like eh, any sort of plot point hinges on adults not believing children. I get so freaking
Same.
frustrated with that. So to like have a nod to like, no, like Fairyland is real, her experiences are real. These are adults that have experienced it in some way. I was just like, yay.
Yes, I am the same. Um, yeah, I also really love how at least in just these first 2 books, and I assume that's gonna continue happening. I love how even though Fairyland is obviously, like, the really exciting part, and that's the part that September keeps being desperate to get back to, it's not like we still have meaningful moments in the real world like even in the first book where she was like so desperate to get away like she misses her mom and she thinks about that throughout the book and then here we have this really beautiful moment of her family coming back together and it is tied to fairyland because of the shadow thing you mentioned but it takes place in the real world like her joy is not like completely dependent on fairyland which even though I love all the magical adventure stuff. Like I like that it makes me hopeful about like the ending of this series.
Yeah.
Not that I know what way it's gonna go or what way I want it to go, but like we were saying in the first discussion, it's like I really trust Catherine and Valente. I don't know what she's gonna do, but I trust her to do it.
That's great to hear. I also hope you enjoy where we go. If we end this and you're like, "Mm,
Actually, yeah.
this is not how I wanted it to end." Awesome. All right, scenes, quotes. What stood out to you?
Okay. I have kind of a long quote, but
Okay.
I love it so much. So I'm gonna subject everyone to it anyway.
Okay.
This is one of the scenes where September meets up with the Marquess.
Mhm.
Um, September did not want to feel for the Marquess. That's how villains get you, she knew. You feel badly for them, and next thing you know, you're tied to train tracks. But her wild, untried heart opened up another bloom inside her, a dark branch heavy with fruit. Poor September, how much easier to be hard and bright and heartless. Instead, a very adult thing was happening in that green new heart. For there are two kinds of forgiveness in the world the one you practice because everything really is all right and what went before is mended. The other kind of forgiveness you practice because someone needs desperately to be forgiven, or because you need just as badly to forgive them. For a heart can grab hold of old wounds and go sour as milk over them. You, being sharp and clever, will have noticed that I said practice. Forgiveness always takes practice to get right, and September was very new at it. She had none of the first sort in her. But the shadow of the Marquess wept so bitterly against her shoulder. All creatures are sometimes wretched and in need.
So beautiful.
I love it, and I feel like this is such a great representative quote because it does, like, almost all of the things that I love about, like, the writing of this book and the book itself, like,
Mhm.
the themes of forgiveness and how messy it is, the, like, narrator talking to the reader, the,
Mm.
like, September just being like, she just is such a stubborn, like she just, like, loves people into being
Yes.
better, and I love that, like
All right. We talked a little bit about this in terms of like a theme of like growing apart from people. So I will read my favorite quote about it. So it says, "Oh September, it is so soon for you to lose your friends to good work and strange loves and high ambitions. The sadness of that is too grown up for you. Like whiskey and voting, it is a dangerous and heady business, as heavy as years. If I could keep your little tribe together forever, I would. I do so want to be generous. But some stories sprout bright vines that tendril off beyond our sight, carrying the folk we love best with them. And if I knew how to accept that with any grace, I would share the secret."
Yeah.
I think about that all the time, that in terms of the last part of that, like if I knew how to accept that with any grace, uh, that sort of sentiment, like I would let you know, but I don't.
Yeah. It's like, if you figure it out, tell me anyway. Like, yeah. One of just the description parts that just really stuck out to me. Um, let's see if I can find it. I was not as good about marking pages, so if you have something to share in the meantime, go for it. I will find what I'm looking for.
Yes, I also have a bunch of the book lover quotes marked as well, especially in that particular scene with the night dodo. And library is never complete. That's the joy of it. We're always seeking one more book to add to our collection. And
Yeah.
this one is one of my favorites of the entire series. A book is a door, always and forever. A book is a door into another place and another heart and another world.
I yeah, I love that. I think one of my favorite scenes in the whole book was when she meets is it like the inventor? I can't remember who said what, but like she's talking about she's like, oh, and it's in the library. She's like analyzing September about what kind of hero she is. And she's like, oh, well, this is a basic like Theseus setup. Like, I love that. Like, as somebody who enjoys like fairy tales and like over analyzing them and how that interacts with like history and culture, like, it even reminded me of that like classification system for the kinds of fairy tales. I can't remember what the name of it is, but like,
Yeah.
that was one of my favorite things. Like, that was something that was like, so specifically targeted to my interests. I was like, I'm having a great time over here. Um,
I have this quote is one that like speaks to me personally, because I am somebody with a unique name and who's like super used to people getting it wrong. And I have always really struggled with like correcting people on the
mm,
pronunciation of my name. And this has been like a whole like lifetime's worth of struggle. So this quote, it says, "People will call you whatever they want. New owner, new name. If it bothers you, you oughtn't come when you're called. They'll learn eventually. I rarely come trotting when someone hollers for me. That's all a name's for in the end." And I was like, "You're right. I shouldn't
yeah,
come trotting."
yes, I loved that one as well. I really loved the description of like when September becomes a fairy. Like
Mhm.
that was just so I don't know, like the tone of that is just very like old world fair folk, and I loved that. Yeah, and it's not even like overly descriptive, but it just says September wore instead a delicate gown of grasshopper wings and the smallest spider webs, hazelnut shells and lacy mushrooms, oak leaves and crow feathers and corn silk, beaded with fireflies and raindrops. Her feet hung bare above her plush seat, and she felt two long, satiny wings beat slowly at her back, as natural as lifting her arms. September was a fairy. September laughed at the same moment that tears came to her eyes. Everyone was staring at her, their jaws slack, their gaze uncertain, as though they too did not know whether to laugh or cry. Like just that sense of wonder. I love it.
Yes. Yes. I got another one from the chat. "The wild bits of you have been shrinking up and blowing away bit by bit. It's only that you don't really need them in Nebraska. You probably just thought you were growing up. It's an easy mistake." I love that. I love that idea that losing like sense of wonder or wildness, we chalk that up to growing up, but
Yeah, and it actually means that something's gone wrong and you need to
yeah.
fix that. Yeah, I love that. Like that's another way that like she does like the author does like take this kind of classic like the heartbreak of growing up story, but
Yeah.
also she plays with that where it's like it doesn't have to be that way. Like
Yes. Yes.
um yeah, like however things go for September at the end of the series, which I'm sure I'm going to cry a lot. Um but it's like I can't imagine that she becomes somebody who doesn't believe in fairyland, you know?
Yeah.
Um
Yes.
yeah, trying to find that line from the Panther where he's talking about, oh, cats don't have shadows or whatever that was, because I remember that one was really funny. Um, but I didn't mark it because that is
Oh, this
foolish.
is a good reminder too. It reminded me of Lie. This is a good reminder of like the Sybil. There's always like a transition period of like moving into the place where you are going. And in the first book, it was Lie, like washing up her courage in order to like set her on her journey. And here it was the Sybil. And she, again, September has to make a choice in terms of like what Sybil she wants to meet. And she goes for complexity, I believe it is, and she's like, wait, can I take it back? She's like, wait, I don't know that I want this. And I
Yeah,
love this moment so much.
yeah. Um, this is another one also about the Marquess and Halloween, who I just found very interesting, obviously, but also those themes that we kept talking about. And like the similarities between September and these like other versions of herself. She had pitied the Marquess, but not enough to hesitate when she had to hurt her. Yet her raw young heart beat boldly now, and as it looked on the shadows of the folk she loved best, it broke open. She could not call them wicked, could not see them only as selfish and savage as villains must be seen if they are to be fought without pulling punches. Halloween was her. A little girl had gone after her father, breaking the world in two just to get him back. Wouldn't September herself have done the same? But then again, perhaps she would not have even thought of a thing so daring and slanted and strange. That dark, still girl, holding her friends close, had done 100 things September had not. She was a sister. She was not September herself.
Yeah. This just reading the quotes. I'm like, it's too much. It's too
I
many
know.
emotions. Uh, Amy found your
There we
uh,
go. Yes.
cats don't have dark sides. That was a good one.
Yeah. And I like that it's like funny, but it's also really lovely because it's not one of those things where it's like, huh, cats are already evil. LOL. It's like, nah, we're doing our shadow thing already. Like,
We are who we are.
yeah.
Uh, all right. I think we are wrapping up here. Any final thoughts on the girl who fell beneath fairyland and led the revels there?
As we're talking about it, I'm like, is this a 5 stars?
It
Maybe.
is.
Like,
It is a 5 stars. Didn't I tell you you were wrong at the beginning?
I love
But
this
this
so
is a
much.
five-star book. You do you. Yeah. I think I there's one book in the series that I did not rate a 5 star. But otherwise the rest are. So consider
Interesting.
just consider your rating. Just see if you want to bump it up a little bit.
I mean, if we're going by majority rules, I think it has to be. Like,
It's definitely 5 stars. The people have spoken.
yeah.
Me and Amy have spoken.
Uh, yeah, I'm loving this. It's funny because I can already tell from the second book. I'm like, wow, I'm just gonna keep finding more things where I'm like, was this personally written for me? Like for
Yes.
my interests and for what like stabs me in my soft little feelings. Like,
So I talk about this a lot about in terms of like the ways that you can like hate or love things. Like there are books that I love that if other people don't love them, I feel some type of way about it. I'm like, how can you not love this? Like this is great. This is on. I feel kind of that way about Pride and Prejudice when people are like, oh, I'm just like, you're wrong, and I don't
yeah,
understand how you can't love this. This is
that's
a
the truth.
book though. This is a book though that I feel like I love enough for everyone. I don't care if a single other person in this world does not love this series. I love it. It's mine. That's all I need to know is that Catherine and Valenti wrote this for me, and I love it, and that's the end. So, I mean, I guess I can share with other people who love it, but if
Yeah.
nobody else does, like, I don't care in the same way that, like, other books, if people don't like it, I'm like, no, you're wrong. Here, I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I think about that distinction of favorite books a lot too. Um, I mean, Pride and Prejudice being flawless is just a fact though. Like,
It is a fact.
I mean, I'm sorry that some people are wrong, but that's not our fault.
Right. This one is for me. It's for nobody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I guess that means we are moving on to book three. I don't know. We probably didn't finish talking about this, but we will be reading it in December and doing a live show either end of December or very, very beginning of January. So we will put information out about that live show, and it will be back on Cara's channel for book three. Anything else people need to know?
I think those are the main things. Yeah, keep following our social media for updates. I would guess it's probably going to be closer to beginning of January just because
Yeah.
of how Christmas and New Year's fall this year.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, can't wait for book 3. I'm still waiting for the part that's gonna just like make me bawl because so far I have not cried. I have gotten extremely emotional, but it's
Yes.
been the kind of emotional that like doesn't involve tears. So
Yes.
I'm
It's
sure
like
we'll discuss it the first time it happens.
I don't know if I've cried ever on these books, but it's been like heart over like overflowing with emotion,
Yes.
like heart in the throat, like
Yeah.
flutters in the belly sort of emotion, but I don't know that I cried at any point. So it'll
Yeah.
be interesting to see or to remember if I have or to see if you do at any point.
Yeah. Yeah. We will definitely be discussing that if and when it happens.
Yes, in detail. We'll be like, I cried here.
Yeah. Here's my log of the number of tears shed on over this book.
I
Yeah.
I know you guys cannot wait.
I am like 100% a book crier. Like sometimes when I talk about a book that I really loved and that was really emotional, I'll like mention that it made me cry and I'm like, this is meaningless information to you
Yes.
guys. Like I think I'm on the end of probably cries more than the average person. So this doesn't mean
I am
just
100 there's no probably. I 100% cry more than the average person. So, also
it's like
meaningless if I say
like
I cry at something, but
yeah. It's like one of those like bar graphs where it's like the 99th percentile. It's like that's
yes,
me. Like
yes, overflowing with emotions, but not necessarily tears for me as well, as another book crier. Okay,
yes.
so the emotional girlies are saying
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a cry book
It's
or
like a
series.
different kind of deep emotion. So
Yes, yeah.
yeah, we will see you guys for book 3. Thank you so much for reading along with us and being here and watching it back. I know people do that and very much appreciated because I talk a lot. So
Awesome. All of Kara's information is in the description. You guys know where to find me because you're here now. And we will see you for book three shortly. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll talk soon. Bye.